I gripped the edge of the mantel, my knuckles whitening as the portrait's eyes seemed to shift, locking onto mine in the dim flicker of the kerosene lamp. It was 1862, and the Sinclair house in rural Iowa felt heavier than ever that night, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and regret. My name is Eliza Sinclair, the eldest daughter at 19, and I'd sworn to my sisters that the family curse was just Pa's tall tales until now, when the painted faces of our ancestors whispered secrets that made my skin crawl. The portrait hung above the fireplace like a sentinel, its gilt frame chipped from years of prairie winds rattling the windows. It depicted the Sinclair line going back generations, stern men with beards like iron wool, women with lace collars and eyes that pierced through the canvas. But it was the newest edition that chilled me, the blank space where Ma had insisted on adding us girls last winter, before she took ill and faded. We'd posed reluctantly, me in my calico dress, Sarah with her braids, and little Clara clutching her doll. The painter, old Mr. Hargrove from town, had finished it just weeks ago, muttering about how the light in the room bent funny. Now staring at it, I swore the empty spots where our faces should be weren't empty at all. Shadows flickered there, like smoke curling from an unseen fire. "Sister, you look like you've seen a ghost," Sarah said from the doorway, her voice a mix of tease and tremor. At 16, she was the bold one, always sneaking out to the barn to read forbidden novels by lantern light. She crossed the creaking floorboards, her bare feet silent on the rag rugs, and peered up at the painting. "It's just paint and lies. Pa's off fighting rebels in the war. He ain't here to spin more yarns about the bloodline." I forced a laugh, but it came out brittle. "Lies or not, that painter took our likenesses too well. Remember how he made us hold still for hours? Said it was to capture our essence." The word tasted sour. Pa had bought the portrait to honor the family, a Sinclair tradition he claimed stretched back to the old country, where daughters were said to vanish into the walls if they strayed from duty. Nonsense, I'd thought, until the dream started. Night after night I'd wake with the feel of cold fingers tracing my spine, and the portrait's shadows growing longer. Clara whimpered from her trundle bed in the corner, her small form huddled under the quilt. At 10, she was the fragile one, with eyes too wide for her face and a habit of clinging to skirts during storms. "Eliza, make it stop staring," she murmured, peeking out. The lamp's glow cast her shadow across the wall, merging it with the portrait's frame in a way that twisted my gut. "Hush now," I said, kneeling beside her and smoothing her hair. "It's just a picture. We'll take it down tomorrow if it bothers you." But even as I spoke, doubt gnawed at me. Pa had left it hanging as a reminder of our duty, to tend the farm, preserve the land, keep the bloodline pure while he marched south. With him gone and Ma in the ground, it was just us three against the endless Iowa fields, the blizzards that buried the fences, and now this unease that seeped from the walls like frost. Sarah lit another candle, her movement sharp, defiant. "We should burn it." Hargrove was half mad anyway. "Folks say he sees spirits in his brushes." She reached up, fingers brushing the frame, and for a heartbeat, the air hummed, like the distant rumble of thunder. The shadows in the blank spaces deepened, forming outlines, faint but unmistakable. A girl's profile, then another, dissolving like mist. I yanked her hand back. "Don't be foolish. That's Pa's money up there, and ours too if we sell the farm." But my voice wavered. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters, and in the portrait, one shadow solidified into a smile that wasn't ours. Clara screamed, burying her face in my shoulder, and I held her tight, my heart pounding as the first real fear took root. What if the stories were true? What if the daughters of Sinclair weren't meant to outlive the canvas? That night, as we huddled together under the quilts, the house settled with groans that sounded too much like sighs. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, my mind racing through Pa's tales. The curse that bound us, daughters disappearing into the family line, their spirits trapped to guard the legacy. It was superstition, I told myself, born of isolation and war's shadow. But when dawn crept in, gray and reluctant, I rose first, determined to face it. Fetching the hammer from the kitchen, I approached the portrait, hammer raised, only for the nail to hold fast as if rooted in stone. Sarah watched, arms crossed, while Clara whispered prayers. The challenge had begun, not from rebels or storms, but from the very blood in our veins pulling us toward the unknown. The lantern's flame flickered as I pried the attic floorboard loose, my fingers slick with sweat despite the chill seeping through the rafters. Dust motes danced in the dim light, and there it was, The old Sinclair portrait half buried under forgotten linens, its gilt frame cracked like old bones. Father's voice echoed from downstairs, sharp and impatient. "Eleanor, supper's cold. Leave your fool notions and come down." But I couldn't. Not after what happened to Clara last night, her scream cutting off as if swallowed by the walls. I was the only one left who remembered her laugh. The way she'd braid wildflowers into her hair. The portrait stared back at me, those painted eyes, our great-grandmother's, they said, holding secrets thicker than the Iowa mud outside. I dragged the canvas into the moonlight spilling through the dormer window, the house groaning like it disapproved. The air up here always tasted of mildew and regret, but tonight it carried something sharper, like ozone before a storm. Father's journal, tucked in my apron, had mentioned the portrait once. Beware the daughter's gaze. It claims what it sees. Nonsense from a man who'd lost his mind after mother's fever, or so Aunt Lydia claimed before she vanished 2 years ago. I unfolded the journal on the floorboards, tracing the faded ink with my nail. There, a sketch of the frame with symbols etched into the wood, hidden unless you tilted it just right. If I could decode them, maybe I'd understand why Clara's room was empty this morning, her bed untouched, no sign of struggle. My heart hammered as I fetched the lantern closer, its glow catching the portrait's details. The Sinclair women in their high-collared dresses, standing rigid before a cornfield that looked too alive, stalks bending as if in wind that wasn't there. I was about to trace the first symbol, a swirling vine like the ones on Mother's locket, when the floor creaked behind me. "Ellie, what in God's name are you doing up here?" It was Thomas, our hired hand, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, his face shadowed but kind, the way it always was when Father wasn't watching. He'd found me crying after Clara's scream, promised to help without asking too many questions. Cautious Thomas, who fixed fences with steady hands and never rushed a decision. "I think it's this," I whispered, nodding at the portrait. Clara, she was looking at it before bed, said it whispered to her. My voice cracked, but I pushed on, showing him the journal. "We burn it. Tonight. Before Father sees and locks us both out in the storm." Thomas knelt beside me, his calloused fingers brushing mine as he examined the symbols. He wasn't family, but he'd been with us since the war started, his own kin lost to bullets in Virginia, brave in quiet ways like when he'd faced down rustlers last harvest. "Burning might not stop it," he murmured, his breath warm against the cold. "But it's a start. Fetch the oil from the barn. Quiet now." We moved like thieves in our own home, the stairs whispering under our feet. The house felt alive, walls pressing in as thunder rumbled distant over the prairie. In the kitchen, Father snored by the fire, his pipe still clenched in his teeth, oblivious to the portrait's pull. I'd seen him polish that frame once, eyes distant, muttering about the bloodline's duty. Thomas lit the lantern anew outside, rain starting to patter on the roof like impatient fingers. We met at the edge of the cornfield, the portrait wrapped in burlap between us, heavy as guilt. "Now," I said, pouring the oil. The flames caught quick, devouring the canvas with a hungry roar. For a moment, relief flooded me. Clara's face, painted in the corner, twisted and blackened, gone forever. But then the fire twisted wrong. Instead of ash, the smoke coiled upward, forming shapes that weren't smoke at all. Faint outlines of skirts and braids, stepping out from the blaze like ghosts from a dream. Thomas grabbed my arm, pulling me back as the figures solidified, their eyes, those painted eyes, locking onto mine. "Run!" he shouted, but my feet rooted, the symbols from the journal burning in my mind. The first plan had backfired spectacularly. Whatever curse bound the Sinclairs wasn't in the canvas. It was in us. The rain hissed on the unnatural fire, and one figure reached out, her hand cold as the grave, whispering my name, Eleanor, like a promise of what came next. I gripped the edge of the mantel, my knuckles whitening as the portrait's frame seemed to pulse under the gaslight's flicker. Eliza's eyes, those painted eyes that had stared down every generation, now followed me with an unnatural gleam, as if she'd stepped closer in the night. It was the third evening since we'd unearthed the hidden compartment behind the canvas, the one holding the locket with Mother's faded miniature, and a lock of hair too fine for any of us Sinclair girls. Father had dismissed it as coincidence, but I knew better. The air in the parlor grew thick like before a storm, carrying whispers that slithered past the curtains. "Clara, you're imagining things again," Thomas muttered from his armchair, not looking up from his ledger. He was always like that, practical to a fault, his ink-stained fingers flipping pages as if numbers could ward off the family's ghosts. But even he paused when the floorboards creaked under no one's weight, a slow groan from the direction of the attic stairs. We both froze, the only sound the distant hoot of an owl outside the farmhouse window. Iowa's plain stretched black and endless beyond the glass, swallowing the moonlight, but inside the shadows clung like damp earth. I pushed off the mantel and crossed to the portrait, my skirts brushing the worn rug. Up close, the paint on Eliza's gown looked freshly laid, the deep crimson blooming as if wet. She was the first Sinclair daughter, gone missing in 1792, or so the family Bible claimed, vanished into the portrait during a fever dream, her likeness trapping her spirit while her body wasted away. Nonsense, Father called it, but tonight, with the locket's chain still warm in my pocket, I traced the gold lettering on the frame. Blood endures. My finger came away dusted with something metallic, sharp-scented like old blood. A sharp rap at the door jolted us both. Thomas slammed the ledger shut, his face paling. Who'd be out this late? Bandits? But I knew it wasn't. The knock came again, deliberate from the porch where the wind chimes hung silent. I lit a lantern from the hearth, its flame sputtering to life, and handed it to him. Stay here, I whispered, though my voice betrayed the tremor. He nodded, grabbing the shotgun from above the fireplace, his caution giving way to that quiet resolve I'd always admired. The door creaked open to reveal Sarah, our neighbor from the next claim over, her bonnet askew and eyes wide with urgency. She clutched a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, rain damp from the sudden squall brewing. Clara, thank God. It's about the portrait, the one your ma kept hidden. She pushed inside without waiting, glancing over her shoulder at the empty yard. Thomas lowered the gun slightly, but his grip stayed firm. Sarah unwrapped the bundle on the table, revealing a sketchbook, pages yellowed and edges frayed. Found this in my barn after the lightning strike last week. Drawings of your sisters, Lillian, Beatrice, even young Mary. But look at the dates. I leaned in, the lantern light casting jagged shadows across the ink. The sketches were exquisite, capturing Lillian's defiant chin, Beatrice's soft curls, but the dates were wrong, scribed after their disappearances years ago. And in the margins, faint pencil marks. They call from the frame. Eliza waits. My stomach twisted. These were the daughters who'd faded one by one, starting with Lillian in 59, then Beatrice during the drought, and Mary just last harvest. Each time the portrait changed subtly, a new face blending into the background, their features merging with Eliza's stern gaze. Sarah's voice dropped to a hush. My grand told stories. The Sinclair Bloodline's curse tied to that painting. Daughters don't die. They get pulled in, preserving the line through the canvas. But it's hungry now, stronger since the war talk stirred up old feuds. Thomas scoffed, but his eyes darted to the portrait, where the crimson seemed to deepen. Outside, thunder rumbled, closer now, shaking the windows. I touched the locket again, feeling its unnatural warmth pulse like a heartbeat. If Eliza was calling us back, why me? The last unwed daughter, the one who'd sworn off the farm's shadows for the city lights. We burn it, Thomas said suddenly, his voice steady despite the fear etching his brow. He moved to the hearth, poking the embers to life. But as he reached for the portrait, a gust slammed the door shut unbidden and the room plunged into chill. The whispers returned, clearer now. Names, our names, echoing from the walls. Sarah grabbed my arm. No, Clara, fire won't hold it. We have to face what's inside. Her words hung heavy, the sketchbook trembling in her hands. I nodded, steeling myself. Whatever pulled my sisters in, it wouldn't take me without a fight. The lantern flickered once, twice, and in its dying glow Eliza's smile widened just a fraction. The attic air hung thick with dust motes that danced in the sliver of light from the single grimy window, but I paid them no mind as I pried open the old trunk with the crowbar. My hands trembled, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of what I'd uncovered downstairs in Father's study. That faded letter from Great-Aunt Miriam, hinting at the portrait's hunger for Sinclair blood. If my sister Lydia had truly stepped into that painted frame 2 nights ago, vanishing like mist at dawn, then this trunk might hold the key to pulling her back. Or to understanding why our family's daughters kept fading into obscurity, one generation after another. I flipped the lid back with a creak that echoed like a warning, revealing stacks of yellowed journals bound in cracked leather. Father's voice echoed in my head, his wry chuckle from years past. Eliza, curiosity's a fine horse, but it kicks hard. He was gone now, taken by fever last winter, leaving me to wrangle the farm and this cursed inheritance. I grabbed the topmost journal, its pages brittle under my fingers, and sank onto the floorboards, ignoring the splinter that pricked my palm. The handwriting was Mother's, elegant loops that spoke of a woman who'd once dreamed beyond Iowa's endless cornfields. I scanned the entries, heart pounding as dates jumped out. 1845, the year she married into the Sinclairs. "The portrait watches," she wrote in one passage, ink smudged as if by hurried tears. "Elias says it's just family lore, a silly tale from his English ancestors. But last night I swear the girls in the frame turned their heads toward little Lydia's crib." My own name appeared later, scrawled with affection. Eliza arrived today, fierce-eyed like her father. May she never catch the painting's gaze. A floorboard groaned behind me and I whipped around, crowbar raised. Aunt Beatrice stood in the doorway, her silhouette sharp against the hallway lamp, shawl clutched tight over her bony shoulders. She'd always been the cautious one, the family anchor who mended fences and whispered prayers, but now her eyes held a glint I'd never seen. Wary, almost accusatory. "Eliza, what are you doing up here?" "The doctor's coming at dusk for whatever ails you after that fever you claimed yesterday." I lowered the bar but didn't stand, clutching the journal like a shield. Fever? That was no fever, Aunt. I saw Lydia. She walked right into the frame and it swallowed her whole. "These journals prove it's happened before. Mother knew." My voice cracked on the last word, the earnest plea slipping out despite my resolve to stay steady. Beatrice had raised us after Mother's passing, her quiet strength a balm, but she'd always deflected questions about the portrait, calling it foolish superstition. She stepped closer, her footsteps soft on the warped wood, and knelt beside me with a sigh that carried the weight of unspoken burdens. "Child, listen. The Sinclairs brought that painting from across the ocean, a vanity piece from some long-dead lord. But it's more than paint and canvas, it's tied to a promise or a curse depending on who tells the tale." Her fingers brushed the journal's cover, hesitating. "Your great-grandmother disappeared into it during the cholera year. They said she went mad, wandered off into the fields. But I saw the truth once as a girl. The eyes in the frame, they pull at the bloodline's daughters when the family's desperate. Like now, with the drought killing the crops and debts piling up, the portrait offers escape, a painted world without hunger or loss." I stared at her, the words sinking in like cold rain. Escape? Lydia wouldn't have chosen that, not my bold sister who laughed at storms and dared me to race her to the river. But the farm was failing. Creditors circled like vultures, and without Father's steady hand, we'd lose everything by spring. Then why hide it? If it's real, we could fight it, burn the damn thing. Beatrice's laugh was bitter, short as a snapped twig. "Fight a Sinclair heirloom? Elias tried back when your mother vanished, scorched the edges, but it mended overnight. Hungrier than before. No, Eliza, the only way is to face it on its terms. Enter and bargain or lose another." She rose, offering a hand, her grip firm despite the tremor I felt. "Come downstairs. The doctor's buggy is early. He'll think you're raving if you keep digging like this." I took her hand but pulled away once standing, tucking the journal under my arm. The attic felt smaller now, the shadows lengthening as if the portrait downstairs were listening. Bargain? The word tasted like ash, but Lydia's face, pale and pleading in my memory, pushed me forward. We'd always been a team, she and I, against the world's cruelties. If entering that frame meant risking the same fate as Mother, so be it. But I'd go clever, not blind, armed with these words from the past. As we descended the creaking stairs, the house seemed to hold its breath, the air growing heavier with each step. In the parlor, the portrait loomed above the mantel, its gilt frame catching the fading light. The daughters within, ancestors with our same dark hair and stubborn chins, smiled serenely, but their eyes followed us, unblinking. I felt it then, a subtle tug at my core like threads unraveling from within. Aunt Beatrice paused at the door, whispering, "Be brave. But remember, once you're in, the way out demands a price." The doctor's knock rattled the front door, sharp and insistent, pulling me. I gripped the edge of the attic trunk, my knuckles whitening as dust motes danced in the sliver of light from the cracked window. The portrait stared back at me from its faded oils. Those 3 Sinclair girls, my great-aunts, or so Pa had called them, frozen in their lace collars and solemn gazes, as if they'd stepped out of 1862 and into this very moment. But it wasn't their eyes that chilled me. It was the empty space beside them, where Eliza's figure should have been, smudged like a half-erased chalk mark on a school slate. "Elias, you see it too, don't you?" Clara whispered, her voice barely cutting through the musty air. She knelt beside me, her dark curls escaping the pins, her cautious nature holding her back even now, after we'd pried open this forbidden chest. Clara had always been the steady one, the sister who mended hems and balanced the ledgers while I chased ghosts. But tonight, with the farmhouse creaking under an Iowa wind that howled like the prairie wolves, even she couldn't deny the wrongness. I nodded, unable to speak at first. The attic smelled of old cedar and forgotten secrets, the kind Pa had buried deeper than his war wounds. He'd passed last winter, muttering about the Sinclair curse, the daughters who vanished one by one into the family line. Eliza first, then the twins, all swallowed by that portrait as if the canvas hungered for them. I traced the frame with my finger, feeling the rough grain splinter under my nail. It's not just faded. Look, her handprint right there on the edge. Clara leaned closer, her breath fogging the glass. Her hand trembled as she touched it, and I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, the same one that had kept her from joining me on those midnight searches through the barn. But we were out of options. The farm was failing, the drought turning our fields to cracked earth, and whispers from townfolk about unpaid debts circling like vultures. If the portrait held the key to the Sinclair fortune Pa always hinted at, we had to unravel it before the bank took everything. A floorboard groaned below, sharp and deliberate. We froze. "Who's there?" I called, my voice steadier than I felt, grabbing the lantern from the trunk. Shadows leaped across the rafters as I swung it high, illuminating cobwebs thick as curtains. No answer, but the steps ascended, slow and measured. Clara clutched my arm, her wit deserting her for once. "Elias, what if it's him? The one from the stories, the collector who came for the girls." I shook my head, pushing down the knot in my gut. Pa's tales were just that, tales of a traveling painter who arrived in '62, canvas and easel in tow, promising immortality for the Sinclair blood. But immortality came at a price. The daughters posed one by one and never emerged. The portrait hung in the parlor after, a trophy that brought wealth but devoured the family. We'd laughed it off as superstition, but now with Eliza's absence glaring from the canvas, it felt too real. The attic door creaked open, and there stood Amos, our hired hand, his broad frame filling the threshold, pitchfork still in hand from the evening chores. His face was weathered, eyes narrow under the brim of his hat. "Heard noises up here. Thought it was raccoons again." But his gaze flicked to the portrait, lingering too long, and I wondered if he'd known all along. "Nothing but old junk," I said, forcing a grin, though my heart hammered. Amos had been with us since Ma died, loyal but secretive, vanishing on full moons to check traps. If anyone knew the portrait's truth, it was him. He stepped inside, boots thudding on the planks. "That ain't junk, boy. That's the devil's mirror." Clara gasped, and I shot her a look to stay silent. Amos wiped his brow, sweat beading despite the chill. "Your pa made me swear never to speak of it. But with the debts piling, the collector's coming back. Says the portrait's incomplete without the last Sinclair daughter." Clara's grip tightened. "What do you mean, coming back? He's been dead for decades." Amos chuckled, low and bitter. "Dead? Men like him don't die easy. He rode in on that black stallion during the war, painting souls for the Confederates' coffers. Took Eliza first. Said her spirit lit the canvas like firelight. The twins followed, vanishing into the frame while their pa counted gold coins. Now he wants you, Miss Clara. The bloodline ends with the portrait whole." I stood, lantern raised like a shield. The air thickened, the wind outside rattling the shutters as if the house itself protested. "We're not giving her up. Tell us how to stop it." Amos hesitated, glancing at the canvas where the girls' eyes seemed to follow us. "Burn it, but it won't be clean. Their spirits cling like burrs. Last time someone tried, the fire spread, took half the barn and the fool with it." Clara pulled away, her cautious facade cracking. "Elias, we can't. That's our history, Ma's history." But her voice wavered, and I saw the adventure spark in her, the one she'd buried under practicality. Before I could reply, a shadow shifted behind Amos, tall, cloaked, materializing from the stairwell's gloom. The collector. His face was gaunt, eyes like polished obsidian, a sketchbook tucked under his arm. "The blood calls," he rasped, voice echoing unnaturally. "The portrait hungers." Panic surged. I shoved the trunk shut, grabbing Clara's hand as I gripped the edge of the attic floorboard, my knuckles whitening as the wood creaked under the pressure. Dust motes swirled in the lantern's flicker, and there it was again, that faint whisper, like silk brushing against canvas, coming from the portrait propped against the rafters. Eliza's face stared back, her eyes too alive, too knowing, as if she'd been waiting for me to come prying. "Amelia, you can't keep doing this," I muttered to myself. But my voice echoed hollow in the cramped space. It was the third night since I'd found the hidden sketch behind the family canvas, the one showing 4 daughters where history said there were only 3. My sisters, Clara, Beatrice, and little Eliza, had always teased me about my curiosity, but now Clara was gone, vanished into the fields after swearing she'd seen Eliza's ghost in the mirror. Beatrice paced downstairs like a caged wolf, refusing to speak of it. And me? I was the fool climbing ladders in the dark, chasing shadows that might swallow us whole. The portrait loomed larger in my mind than the canvas itself. Painted by Father in '59 before the war pulled him east, it captured us on the porch. Me at 16, braids tight and smile forced. Clara with her wild curls and defiant chin. Beatrice, book in hand, eyes distant. Eliza was the ghost, even then absent, her spot empty like a missing tooth. But the sketch? It filled her in, her hand reaching toward the frame's edge, fingers blurring into the gold leaf. I wedged the floorboard up with my knife, heart pounding as a hollow space revealed itself. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, addressed to Father in a child's scrawl. The top one trembled in my grasp. "Papa, the picture eats us one by one. Don't let it take me next," Eliza's words, dated 1860. My breath caught. She'd been 9 then, playful and sharp-tongued, not the fragile girl we'd buried after the fever. Footsteps thudded below, Beatrice no doubt her caution fraying into anger. "Amelia, get down here before you break your neck." Her voice sliced through the floorboards, laced with that edge she'd honed since Clara's disappearance. I shoved the letters into my apron, the portrait's gaze burning my back as I descended the ladder, each rung a reluctant surrender. In the kitchen, Beatrice stood by the hearth, arms crossed, her face gaunt in the firelight. The room smelled of cornbread and lye soap, a stubborn normalcy against the unraveling world outside. Iowa's winds howled against the cabin walls, carrying whispers of war news from the rivers. Men marching south, families fracturing. But our fracture was older, rooted in that damned painting. "What have you got there?" she demanded, nodding at the bulge in my apron. No warmth in her eyes, just the wary calculation of someone who'd seen too much slip away. I hesitated, then pulled out the letters, fanning them like forbidden cards. Eliza wrote these before everything she knew about the portrait. Said it eats people. Beatrice snatched one, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her jaw. She read silently, lips moving, then crumpled it in her fist. "Superstition. Father's guilt, that's all. He painted over her because he couldn't bear losing her. And Clara. Clara's just run off with that peddler boy, mark my words." But her voice cracked, betraying the lie. We'd searched the fields, the river banks. No tracks, no note. Only her shawl tangled in the rose bushes by the house, as if she'd been pulled backward into the earth. I leaned against the table, the wood cool under my palms. Then why hide them? And why does the sketch show her reaching out like she's trying to pull us in? Beatrice's eyes flicked to the parlor wall, where the portrait hung shrouded in cloth. "Because we're Sinclairs, Amelia. We cling to ghosts instead of living. Burn those letters. Pretend you never found them." Her words hung heavy, but I saw the fear she tried to bury, the same fear that had me climbing attics at midnight. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters like impatient fingers. If the portrait was a trap, we'd sprung it long ago. And now, with Clara gone, it hungered for the rest. That night, sleep evaded me. I lay in my narrow bed, the letters tucked under my pillow, their edges sharp against my cheek. Dreams came in fragments, Eliza's laughter echoing from the frame, her small hand beckoning. I woke sweating, the first gray light of dawn seeping through the curtains. Beatrice was already up, her silhouette moving in the kitchen, packing, perhaps. No, she wouldn't leave me, not yet. But as I rose, a new sound pierced the quiet, a soft scraping from the parlor. The shroud slipping? I crept to the door, peering in. The portrait stood uncovered, cloth pooled at its base like spilled milk. And there, in the empty space beside Beatrice's painted figure, a faint outline shimmered. Eliza's face emerging from the shadows, her eyes locking onto mine. I froze, pulse thundering. It wasn't a trick of light. The canvas breathed, subtle as a heartbeat, drawing me closer. One step then another until my fingers brushed the frame. Cold gold, unyielding, but inside the paint swirled, colors bleeding like fresh wounds. Amelia? Beatrice's voice from the hall, urgent now. She burst in, grabbing my arm. What are you— Look, I whispered, pointing. But as she turned, the outline faded. The lantern's flame flickered as I pried open the attic trunk, my fingers slick with dust and sweat. Inside, amid yellowed linens and forgotten ledgers, lay the portrait, larger than I'd imagined, its frame warped from years hidden away. Eliza's face stared back, her eyes sharp and accusing, just like the day she vanished into the cornfields. But it wasn't her alone. There were the others. My sisters blurred at the edges as if the painter had captured them mid-fade. I swallowed hard, the attic air thick with the scent of mildew and something sharper like ozone before a storm. Pa had sworn the painting was cursed, a Sinclair family secret buried after the fever took Ma. Yet here it was, untouched, the girls' dresses rendered in oils that seemed to shift when I tilted it toward the light. My heart pounded. Why had I come up here alone? The house below creaked with the wind, but upstairs it felt like holding my breath. Careful not to tear the canvas, I lifted at it free, propping it against a beam. The inscription on the back, faded ink. To endure, the blood must bind. Nonsense, probably some artist's flourish. But as I traced the letters, a chill crawled up my arm. The attic door, which I'd latched shut, rattled softly. I froze. Who's there? My voice came out smaller than I intended, swallowed by the shadows. No answer, just the wind, or was it footsteps? I grabbed the lantern, its glow casting long fingers across the floorboards. The portrait caught the light again, and for a heartbeat, I swore Eliza's lips curved into a smile. Ridiculous. I was Lily Sinclair, 19 and headstrong. Not some superstitious farm girl spinning tales. Still, my pulse raced as I edged toward the door, the painting's weight forgotten for the moment. Down the ladder I went, portrait tucked under one arm, the rungs groaning under my haste. The hallway below was dim, the oil lamps unlit since supper. Pa was in the parlor, hunched over his pipe, but I didn't call out. Not yet. This thing, it pulled at me like a half-remembered dream. I slipped into my room, barring the door with a chair, and set the portrait on the dresser. In the mirror's reflection, my face looked gaunt, eyes hollow from nights poring over Ma's journals. The girls had disappeared one by one, starting with little Clara in 59, then Eliza last harvest. Folks whispered of prairie spirits or runaway scandals, but Pa shut them down, his grief turning to silence. Now staring at the canvas, I wondered if the answers had been here all along. I lit a candle, watching wax pool as I studied the details. Eliza's hand clutched a locket, the same one I'd found in the creek bed last spring. Empty, chain snapped. Beside her, Sarah and Clara, their forms less distinct, as if dissolving into the background haze of gilded frames and shadowed corners. The artist had signed it E. Hawthorne, a name I didn't recognize. Had he seen something we hadn't? A knock shattered the quiet, sharp, insistent. Lily, you up? It was Tobias, our neighbor, his voice muffled through the wood. I'd forgotten he was coming to check the fences after the storm. Panic surged. I couldn't let him see this, not until I understood. Just a moment, I called, blowing out the candle and draping a shawl over the portrait. My hands trembled as I moved the chair, opening the door a crack. Tobias stood there, hat in hand, his weathered face creased with concern. Heard you rummaging. Everything all right? Fine, I lied, forcing a smile. Just sorting old things. His eyes flicked past me into the gloom, and I stepped forward to block the view. But he wasn't fooled, never was. Tobias had been sweet on Eliza before she went, and his gaze sharpened. If it's about the girls, he trailed off, rubbing his jaw. Found something in the fields today. Thought you should see. My stomach twisted. What? A button. Silver, like the ones on her dress. He held it out, glinting in the hall light. Eliza's dress. The one in the portrait. I took it, the metal cold against my palm, and nodded him inside despite myself. As we sat, the shawl slipped just enough to reveal a corner of the canvas. Tobias leaned in, breath catching. Where'd you get that? Attic, I whispered, the word hanging between us like a noose. Outside, thunder rumbled, drawing closer, and I knew whatever secrets the portrait held. They were stirring now, pulling us all into its frame. The lantern's flame flickered as I pressed my palm against the cold glass of the portrait frame, the oil paint beneath my fingers seeming to pulse like a hidden vein. Eliza's eyes, those wide, unblinking eyes from the canvas. locked onto mine, and for a heartbeat I swore they narrowed an accusation. It had been 3 nights since Mother's scream echoed through the attic, the one that pulled me from my fevered sleep, and now here I was, alone in the dim parlor of our crumbling Iowa farmhouse, chasing ghosts while the prairie wind howled outside like a pack of starving wolves. I shouldn't have come back down here. Pa had forbidden it after the last incident, when young Clara vanished during that thunderstorm last spring, her pinafore found crumpled at the portrait's base like a shed skin. But the whispers wouldn't stop, the ones in my head murmuring about the Sinclair blood, how it bound us to this painted prison. I was the last daughter, 16 and stubborn, with no brothers to carry the name forward. If I didn't unravel this, who'd be left to remember? The floorboards creaked behind me and I spun, heart slamming against my ribs. It was just the house settling, or so I told myself, but shadows played tricks in the corners where the wallpaper peeled like old flesh. I traced the edge of the frame again, feeling for the seam Elias Sinclair, our great-grandfather, had hidden during the war, back when he painted this family tree to preserve us from the raiders sweeping the plains. Preserve? What a lie. The portrait showed 4 generations of Sinclair women, their faces frozen in lace and determination. But the colors had deepened unnaturally over the years, as if feeding on something vital. A draft snuffed the lantern, plunging the room into blackness pierced only by moonlight slicing through the shutters. I fumbled for the matches in my apron pocket, striking one against the wall. The sulfur scent bloomed sharp, and as the flame caught, I saw it. A ripple in the paint right where Eliza's hand rested on the canvas table. My living hand, hovered inches away, and the air thickened, humming with that same electric charge I'd felt during the blizzard when Aunt Lydia dissolved into mist before our eyes. "No," I whispered, stepping back, but my boot caught on the rug, sending me stumbling toward the wall. The frame loomed, and in that split second I glimpsed beyond the surface. Not just paint, but a depth like looking into a well of ink where figures moved faintly, reaching out. Eliza's lips parted in the canvas, forming words I couldn't hear. "Join us. Complete the line." I wrenched away, the match burning down to my fingertips, pain jolting me back to the parlor's chill reality. But the humming lingered in my ears, and as I scrambled to relight the lantern, a floorboard groaned upstairs. Deliberate this time, like footsteps descending. Pa was in the fields till dawn, tending the last of the corn against the locust that had stripped half our yield. Who else could it be? The portrait's eyes followed me as I bolted for the stairs, the weight of the Sinclair curse pressing down, demanding its final tribute. If I didn't find the key to break it tonight, the bloodline would claim me too, leaving nothing but another shadow in the frame. I gripped the edge of the portrait frame, my knuckles whitening as the canvas seemed to pulse under my fingers, like it was breathing, drawing in the dim lantern light of the attic. Eliza's face stared back from the painted scene, her eyes not quite right, as if they'd shifted since I'd last looked. It was the 3rd night I'd come up here alone, after Ma had locked herself in her room muttering about curses, and Pa had ridden out to town without a word. The house felt heavier now, the air thick with the scent of old varnish and something sharper, like ozone before a storm. "Why you, Eliza?" I whispered, tracing the line of her embroidered dress in the painting. She was the eldest, gone first, vanished into the fields one harvest morning 10 years back. Folks said she'd run off with a drummer boy, but I knew better. Her laughter still echoed in my dreams, fierce and unyielding, not the kind to flee. The portrait had arrived a month after, a gift from some distant cousin in Boston, capturing the 4 Sinclair girls posed like statues in the parlor, Eliza front and center, me, little Clara, tucked in the corner, all of us with that same dark hair and stubborn jaw. But looking closer now in the flickering light, Eliza's hand seemed outstretched toward the frame's edge, fingers curling as if reaching for something beyond the canvas. A floorboard creaked downstairs, sharp and deliberate. I froze, heart slamming against my ribs. Pa wasn't due back till dawn, and Ma's snores rattled through the vents like distant thunder. I eased the portrait down, its weight surprising me again, and slipped the lantern's wick low. The attic stairs groaned under my stockinged feet as I descended, each step a calculated breath to avoid the warped spots I'd mapped out years ago. At the landing, shadows stretched long from the hallway, but a sliver of light leaked from under the parlor door. Not the hearth's glow, but something colder, steadier. I pressed my ear to the wood, the grain rough against my cheek. Muffled voices, low and urgent. One Ma's edged with that tremor she got when the rheumatism flared, the other, not Pa's gravelly drawl, a woman's voice smooth as river silk, unfamiliar yet tugging at some buried memory. The blood calls them back, Margaret. You can't paint over it forever. My breath caught, Ma's name spoken like an accusation. I nudged the door ajar just enough to peer through. Ma stood by the mantel, her shawl slipping off one shoulder, facing a figure cloaked in a hooded cape that swallowed the light. The woman turned slightly and moonlight caught the edge of a locket at her throat. Oval gold, identical to the one Eliza wore in the portrait. Clara's next if you don't finish what your grandmother started, the stranger said, her tone matter-of-fact, like discussing the price of corn. Ma's face crumpled, hands twisting the hem of her apron. I burned the letters. The Sinclair line ends with me. No more daughters lost to that devil's bargain. The words hit like a slap. Devil's bargain? Our family had whispers of oddities. Grandma Sinclair's herbal cures that worked too well. The way portraits in the attic seemed to watch you. But this? I pushed the door wider, my boot scuffing the threshold. Both women whipped toward me, Ma's eyes wide with terror, the stranger's narrowing in assessment. Clara! Ma gasped, lunging forward to shove me back. Go to your room. Now. But the stranger stepped into the light, hood falling back to reveal sharp features and hair the color of raven wings. Much like Eliza's, but older, lined with secrets. She's already in it, Margaret. The portrait chooses. Her gaze locked on mine, and for a heartbeat I swear I saw Eliza's eyes in hers, pleading. I backed away, pulse thundering as Ma barred the door behind me. Upstairs the attic called, the canvas waiting. Whatever bargain haunted us, it wasn't done pulling us in. The lantern's flame guttered in the draft from the attic stairs, casting jagged shadows across the Sinclair portrait that hung crooked on the warped wall. I gripped the frame's edge, my fingers slick with sweat, as Eliza's whisper cut through the musty air. Elias, it's pulling again, feel it? Her hand trembled on my arm, but I couldn't tear my eyes from the canvas where our sister's face, young Abigail, seemed to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. I leaned closer, heart pounding against my ribs. The paint wasn't dry. It never had been. Not since Pa hung it up after the fever took her. But tonight, with the storm howling outside the farmhouse, the eyes in the portrait followed us. Followed me. As if daring me to touch the surface. We end this now, I muttered, pulling the small knife from my belt, the one I'd sharpened by the hearth that morning. The blade caught the light, a sliver of defiance in the gloom. Eliza stepped back, her skirts brushing the floorboards that creaked like old bones. She was the cautious one. Always had been. Her wit sharp but reined in by fear of what Ma called the family curse. What if it takes you too? The stories. Girls vanishing into the bloodline, trapped in the paint like flies in amber. Her voice cracked, but she didn't flee. Instead, she clutched the locket at her throat, the one with Abigail's hair woven inside. I pressed the knife's tip to the canvas just below Abigail's chin, where the brushstrokes blurred into shadow. The first cut was easy, a whisper of resistance, but then the portrait fought back. Ink-black tendrils seeped from the slit, coiling around the blade like smoke from a dying fire. My arm burned, as if the thing inside was clawing through my skin to reach the other side. Damn it, I hissed, twisting harder. The room spun, the air thickening with the scent of wet earth and something sweeter, like the wild roses that bloomed by the creek where Abigail had last played. A low groan echoed from the frame, not from the wood but from within the paint itself, and suddenly Eliza was there, her hands over mine, steadying the knife. Together then, she said, her breath hot against my ear. We sliced deeper, the canvas tearing with a sound like ripping silk. Colors bled out, crimson for the dresses, gold for the fields, but mixed with them were flashes of memory. Abigail laughing in the yard, Ma's stern portrait gaze, the night the fever came and the artist arrived uninvited, his eyes too hungry for our family's secrets. The tendrils lashed out, wrapping my wrist, pulling me forward until my forehead nearly touched the gash. I saw her then, Abigail, not as a girl but as a shadow begging release, her mouth open in a silent scream. Panic surged, but Eliza yanked back, her nails digging into my flesh. Not you, never you, she shouted. And with a final desperate shove, we drove the knife through the heart of the portrait. The attic shuddered, dust sifting from the rafters like ash. The tendril snapped, recoiling into the wound, and the canvas went slack, colors fading to dull smears. Abigail's face dissolved, leaving only empty eyes staring at nothing. I slumped against the wall, Knife clattering to the floor, my arm throbbing where invisible bruises bloomed. Eliza knelt beside me, wiping my brow, her own face pale but fierce. "It's over," she whispered, though we both knew the cost. The portrait was ruined, Pa's legacy torn, and the house felt hollow now, as if a piece of us had bled out with it. But as the storm broke outside, rain drumming on the roof, I caught a glimpse in the fractured glass of the attic window. A faint outline, girl-shaped, fading into the night. Not trapped anymore, perhaps, but gone all the same. Eliza followed my gaze, her hand tightening on mine. We'd saved what was left of the bloodline, but the Sinclair name carried its ghosts lighter now, or heavier, depending on the dawn. I gripped the edge of the attic ladder, my knuckles whitening as the portrait's frame seemed to pulse under the lantern's flicker. Eliza's voice echoed from below, sharp and insistent. "Hurry, Thomas, before the storm breaks the roof." But up here in the dust-choked air, time felt thicker, like molasses pulling at my boots. The canvas stared back. Those Sinclair girls frozen in their lace collars, eyes too knowing for painted things. I'd come for the hidden latch Father mentioned in his fevered ramblings, the one that might explain why my great-aunts vanished that winter of '62, swallowed by the house itself. My fingers traced the wood, finding a seam that gave way with a click, revealing not letters or a journal, but a small, tarnished locket wedged in the back. The locket snapped open in my palm, and there she was. Eleanor Sinclair, the eldest daughter. Her face a mirror of the portrait, but alive, mid-laugh, with a tiny daguerreotype curl of hair tucked inside. My breath caught. It was dated 1861, just before the disappearances. Heart pounding, I pocketed it and descended, the ladder's rungs creaking like old bones. Eliza waited in the hallway, her apron dusted with flour from the interrupted supper, eyes wide with that mix of fear and fire I'd always admired in her. "What did you find?" she whispered, glancing at the shadowed staircase where the wind howled through cracks. "Not much," I lied, the weight of the locket burning against my chest. We couldn't afford more rumors in town. The Sinclairs were already whispers of madness, their land cursed after the war drafts took the sons and left only daughters to fend off creditors. But Eliza knew me too well. Her hand squeezed my arm, cautious yet unyielding. "Thomas, if it's tied to the portrait like your father said, we burn it. End this." I nodded, but inside doubt gnawed. Burning wouldn't bring answers, only ash. We moved to the parlor, the storm lashing the windows like impatient fists, and I propped the portrait against the mantel. The girl's eyes followed me, or so it seemed, as thunder rolled closer. Setting the lantern down, I pried at the frame again, this time with a knife from the kitchen drawer. Wood splintered, revealing a false backing, and outspilled yellowed letters tied with faded ribbon. Dozens addressed to Eleanor from a suitor in Chicago, full of promises and secrets. "She's the key," I murmured, scanning the ink-smudged words about a hidden inheritance, a map to family gold buried to evade taxes during the war. Eliza leaned in, her breath warm on my shoulder. "But why disappear? If they had this—" Her voice trailed as a gust rattled the panes, and for a split second the room dimmed, the portrait's colors bleeding sharper, unnaturally vivid. We read on, piecing it together. The daughters hadn't fled or died, they'd staged their vanishing to protect the fortune from a ruthless uncle circling like a vulture, using the portrait as a decoy, smuggling themselves out under cover of a blizzard. But one letter ended abruptly, stained with what looked like blood. "The attic hides the map, but the Watcher knows." Watcher? My skin prickled. The house had always felt alive. Floorboards groaning at night, shadows shifting. Eliza stood abruptly, witty edge cutting through her worry. "Thomas, if there's a map, we find it. No more ghosts in our attic." I agreed, but as we searched the parlor drawers, a floorboard in the hall gave way under my foot. Not a creak, but a deliberate snap, revealing a hollow space beneath. Kneeling, I reached in, fingers brushing paper crinkled with age. A folded map, inked with landmarks. The old mill, the river bend, an X marking a spot under the family oak. But etched beside it in a child's hand, likely little Mary's, was a warning. "They come back through the eyes." The storm peaked then, lightning cracking the sky, illuminating the portrait. For the first time I saw it. The girl's pupils held tiny reflections, not of the painter's studio, but of this very room, our faces staring back from 1862. Eliza gasped, grabbing my sleeve. Thomas, we're not alone. The air grew cold, heavier, and from the portrait's depths a faint whisper stirred like silk on stone. The lantern's flame flickered as I pressed my palm against the cold glass of the portrait frame. The painted eyes of Great Aunt Eliza staring back with that unnerving clarity, as if she'd been waiting for this exact moment. My heart hammered in my chest. 2 daughters gone already, swallowed by this cursed canvas in the dead of night, and now the house creaked like it was breathing, urging me toward the same fate. "Elias, don't," whispered my sister Clara from the doorway, her voice a thin thread in the suffocating dark of the Sinclair attic. But I couldn't stop. The whispers from the painting had grown too loud, promising answers if I just touched the edge where the gold leaf peeled away like old skin. I traced the crack with my fingertip, feeling a warmth that shouldn't be there. Not in this drafty Iowa farmhouse battered by the winter wind howling outside. The year was 1862, and the war's distant thunder felt trivial compared to this. Our family's secret rotting at the core, portraits that didn't just capture likenesses but hungered for them. Clara stepped closer, her skirts rustling, brave in her caution as always, the one who'd bandaged my wounds after Pa's fever took him last spring. "It's the bloodline," she murmured, echoing what we'd pieced together from yellowed letters hidden in the floorboards. Sinclair women vanishing into the family tree, their essences trapped to preserve some twisted legacy of land and lineage. My own reflection warped in the glass, mingling with Eliza's stern gaze, and for a split second, I saw Mother's face superimposed. Gone these 5 years. Her disappearance the spark that drove me to this. The frame shuddered under my hand, a low groan rising from the wood like roots shifting in soil. Dust motes danced wildly in the lantern light, and Clara grabbed my arm, her grip fierce. "We burn it now, Elias, no more waiting for dawn." But doubt clawed at me. Burn the portrait, and what of the sisters it held? Little Anna, just 14 when she faded last harvest, her laughter echoing faintly from the walls ever since. I pulled back, the warmth lingering on my skin like a brand, and nodded, though my mind raced with the risk. The fire could spread, devour the whole attic, the house, our proof of survival amid the prairie blizzards and border raids. We'd come this far by scavenging Pa's old journals, mapping the curse's pattern. Every generation a daughter claimed unless the bloodline fed the canvas with a willing soul. Clara fetched the lantern oil from the shelf, her movements quick and sure, the witty spark in her eyes dulled by fear but not extinguished. "Remember what the traveling preacher said? Spirits cling to greed, not love. This ain't preserving us, it's stealing." She poured the oil in a steady stream over the canvas, the sharp scent cutting through the musty air, and I struck the match. Watching the flame bloom small and hungry at first, the painting resisted, colors seeming to deepen, Eliza's eyes narrowing as if in accusation, but then the edge caught, curling black and acrid smoke billowing up. Heat pressed against us like an intruder's breath, and I shoved Clara toward the ladder, coughing as the flames licked higher. We tumbled down into the hallway, the attic door slamming shut behind us on its own, the roar above growing into a beast's fury. Wood splintered, real wood, not just the frame, and a child's cry pierced the din, Anna's voice clear as day, then fading into a sigh of release. Clara leaned against me, both of us trembling, the house settling around us like a sigh exhaled after years of holding breath. But as the fire brigade's bells tolled in the distance, summoned by a neighbor spotting the glow, the portrait's curse lingered in my veins, a faint pull, whispering that not all daughters were free yet. The Sinclair blood ran deep, and dawn would bring questions we couldn't fully answer. Our family's portrait forever altered, half-burned truth in the ashes. I gripped the edge of the portrait frame, my knuckles whitening as the attic dust swirled like ghosts in the lantern's flicker. Eliza's face stared back from the canvas, her eyes no longer vacant but alive with a frantic plea, as if the paint itself had captured her final breath. Behind me, the floorboards creaked under Thomas's weight. He'd followed me up here after the scream echoed from the fields, his shotgun slung over his shoulder like an old friend's promise. "What in God's name is this?" he muttered, his voice rough from the pipe smoke that clung to his beard. The portrait trembled in my hands, not from my shaking, but from something deeper, a vibration humming through the wood like the earth's own pulse. I'd come up here chasing whispers, old Sinclair family tales of daughters vanishing into heirlooms, their essences trapped by some curse tied to the land. But seeing Eliza's image shift, her painted lips parting as if to speak, turned whisper into roar. "Elias," she seemed to mouth, though no sound escaped the canvas. My heart hammered. She was my great-aunt, lost in 1862, the year the family portrait was finished by that wandering artist who never left town alive. Thomas stepped closer, his boots thudding against the warped planks. "That's no trick of the light. Look at her hand, it's reaching out." He was right. The delicate fingers, once frozen in demure fold, now extended toward us, the oil paint cracking like dry earth under drought. I set the frame down carefully on the trunk, its brass hinges glinting in the dim light, and traced the signature in the corner. J. Harlan, 1862 Harlan, the name from the ledgers, the man who'd painted the Sinclairs and then disappeared. His body never found, just rumors of him bargaining with shadows for eternal youth. A cold draft snaked through the attic rafters, carrying the faint scent of wild roses from the overgrown garden below. That's when the whispers started for real, not in my head, but from the portrait's depths. "Free us," they layered. A chorus of young voices, Eliza's the clearest, laced with the desperation of girls who'd played in these fields before the war swallowed Iowa whole. Thomas froze, his eyes widening beneath bushy brows. "Elias, this ain't right. We burn it now, before it pulls you in too." But burning felt like surrender, like letting the bloodline's secret fester another generation. I knelt, prying at the frame's backing with my knife, the blade slipping on the brittle canvas glue. Splinters caught under my nails as I worked, revealing a hidden layer beneath, a smaller painting, yellowed and faded, showing not the formal family pose but a secret gathering. The Sinclair daughters clustered around Harlan, their faces illuminated by candlelight, hands joined in what looked like a ritual circle, symbols etched into the wood, crude but deliberate, circles within circles invoking binding, entrapment. Thomas grabbed my shoulder, his grip iron from years of plowing stubborn soil. "Listen to me, boy. Your pa warned against this. The daughters didn't just disappear. They were hidden, to protect the farm from raiders or worse. If this thing's alive, it's because of what they did, what Harlan made them do." His words hung heavy, but I shook him off, driven by the pull in my chest, the same grit that had kept our line rooted here through blizzards and battles. The whispers grew insistent, Eliza's voice breaking through, the key in the soil. I glanced out the small attic window, where the moon hung low over the corn-stubbled earth, casting long shadows toward the old well, the one we'd capped after the war, said to be bottomless. Thomas cursed under his breath, loading his shotgun with a click that echoed like judgment. "If we're doing this, we do it together. No lone heroics." We descended the ladder in silence, the portrait tucked under my arm like a live coal. The night air bit sharp as we crossed the yard, boots crunching frost-laced grass. At the well's edge, I pried off the wooden cover, revealing the black maw that had claimed more than buckets over the years. Dropping the frame in felt like betrayal, but as it tumbled, the whispers peaked into a wail, then silenced abruptly. A glow emanated from the depths, not fire, but a soft ethereal light pulling at me like a tide. Thomas steadied me with a hand on my back. "What now?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear etching his face. I peered down, the light revealing glimpses, faces rising not in torment but release, daughters emerging from painted prisons, their forms dissolving into mist that curled upward. Eliza's eyes met mine one last time, grateful before fading. The well shuddered, stones grinding as if the earth exhaled a long-held breath. When the glow dimmed, only quiet remained, and the portrait, when I fished it out with a rope, showed the family whole again. But changed. The daughter's eyes now at peace, no longer trapped. We stood there till dawn, the consequence settling like dew. The farm felt lighter, but the bloodline's weight shifted to us now, guardians of secrets unearthed. Thomas clapped my shoulder. "Earned it, Elias, but don't go digging alone next time." The portrait's eyes followed me as I circled the attic room, the oil paint cracking like old skin under my lantern's flicker. I'd pried the frame loose with a crowbar from Father's barn, sweat stinging my eyes, but the canvas wouldn't budge, stuck fast, as if the wood had grown roots into the floorboards. Eliza's voice echoed in my head from last night's fever dream. "Break it." Mary shattered the lie. "My sister's gone these 3 years, swallowed one by one into that cursed painting of our perfect family, posed stiff as cornstalks in their Sunday best. The war had taken father to the fields of Shiloh, leaving me, the last daughter, to unravel the Sinclair bloodline's secret before it claimed me too. I wedged the crowbar deeper, muscles burning from the effort, when a low groan rippled through the house, like the wind through the Iowa prairies, but sharper, hungrier. Dust sifted from the rafters, and there, in the portrait's shadowed corner, a hand pressed against the glass from inside. Not painted, but real, pale fingers clawing, nails splintered. My heart slammed against my ribs. It was Abigail's hand, the youngest, vanished on her 16th birthday. "No," I whispered, dropping the tool with a clatter. But fear twisted into fury. I couldn't let it end like this. Not after burying mother from grief and watching the neighbors whisper of witchcraft. Gripping the crowbar again, I swung hard, the metal biting into the frame's edge. Wood splintered, but the canvas held, rippling like water under the blow. A whisper slithered out, father's voice. Stern as his sermons, "The bloodline endures, obey." I'd found his journal hidden in the barn last week, pages yellowed with ink that confessed the truth. He'd bartered with some traveling peddler during the '49 gold rush, a charm to bind our family's fortune. Daughters as sacrifices to keep the land fertile through famine and flood. Ingenious, he'd called it. Human will bending the unnatural. But it was madness, a trap that fed on our loyalty. Another swing, and the frame cracked open, releasing a chill that fogged the air. Faces shifted in the paint. Mother's serene smile warped into a scream, Eliza's eyes pleading. I reached in, fingers brushing cold silk, the dress Abigail wore when she disappeared. Pulling back, I tore at the canvas with my bare hands, nails ripping through layers of lies. Paint flaked away, revealing not just images, but etchings. Symbols I'd seen in Mother's Bible, twisted into curses. "Come back," I growled, voice steady despite the tremor in my arms. This wasn't surrender. It was reclamation, our grit against his greed. The house shuddered, floorboards buckling as shadows poured from the tear. I stumbled back, lantern tumbling, flames licking the edges. But in the chaos, hands emerged, not clawing but grasping mine. Eliza first, coughing dust, her face gaunt but alive, eyes wide with recognition. Then Abigail, trembling, whispering my name. Mother last, frail but unbroken, pulling us into an embrace that smelled of lavender and earth. The portrait ignited, flames devouring the frame in a hungry roar, but we were free. Singed, scarred, but whole. Dawn broke over the Sinclair farm as we stepped outside. The attic a smoldering ruin behind us. The war raged on. Letters from father still unanswered, but the bloodline's curse lay in ashes. We'd rebuild sisters bound by more than blood, by the fire we'd kindled ourselves. The portrait's eyes watched no more. In their place, our future stretched wide as the prairie sky, earned through sweat and unyielding will.